William Hackulich served as a U.S. Marine in the Pacific Theater from 1941 to 1945. He received a Purple Heart and saw combat in New Guinea and Guadalcanal.
Thank you for coming out. You may decline to answer any question you're not comfortable with. If at any point you want us to stop recording, please let us know. During World War II, which branch of service did you serve in?
U.S. Marine Corp.
What was your rank?
Corporal. That's because I talked when I shouldn't talk.
Where did you serve?
South Pacific.
Where in the South Pacific?
Guadalcanal, New Guinea, New Britain, and Peleliu, where I got wounded.
How did you get wounded? What was your wound and how did you get it?
Oh, that'll come last because I was on Guadalcanal first. Then I got to New Guinea, and then New Britain, and the last one was Peleliu, which was the worst one of all. We shouldn't have gotten into it, but the admirals and the generals decided what we should do, even though they didn't have to do it. But since they were the boss, we had to follow.
Why did you pick the service branch that you joined?
That was interesting. I graduated in 1941 from high school, and the Japanese were buying scrap iron from the United States for 40 and 41. And as a junior and senior high school, I knew that we were going to have a war with Japan sooner or later. But I was desperate for money, so I picked up scrap iron. So after I graduated from high school in 41, I tried to get a job. Couldn't get a job anywhere because it was all recession. My God, it was rough. Couldn't do anything. So I decided, well, I might as well join the service so I won't get drafted. So I walked from my hometown all the way up to Binghamton, New York, 9 miles. Didn't have any money for streetcars. So I went into this building in there where there was a Air Force office. I wanted to be a pilot. So I went in there, and they told me that I could join the I could become a pilot, but I would have to stay in town and get trained there. I didn't want to stay in my hometown. I wanted to leave. When you're young, you don't want to stay in one spot. You want to go someplace. So I went to a Navy place, and I didn't like the way they treated me, so I left. I went out of the building, and who should I see but a sergeant, Marine Corps sergeant, all dressed in blues. Sergeant, boy, he impressed me. And we started to talk. And he says, well, what would you like to do? I says, well, if I join up, how soon can I leave? He says, you can leave at any time you want to. Well, this was on a Friday. So, okay. I says, can I leave Saturday? Whatever you want to. So he gave me the papers. I went back to my hometown, went to high school, to all different places, got to fill up the application, came back Saturday, went over to see him, all dressed in blues. Wow. And gave him the papers, and he put me on a plane or on a train going to Syracuse, New York. So from there, I had my physical examination, and they put me on a train going to Palau Island. North Carolina. Okay so far?
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
Boy, couple, I I could tell you quite a few memorable experiences. The big ones, I couldn't figure out why we would spend so much money shelling these different islands. We had battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, aircraft carriers, shelling Guadalcanal and New Britain, Peleliu, and so on. Because when you get on the island, on the shore, you find out all they did was no damage at all. All they did was knock the tops of the trees off. And if there were any fuel dumps there, naturally they hit the fuel dumps. And if there was any tanks up there, they knocked the tanks out. But outside of that, they did absolutely no damage at all. Because the Japanese were in their foxholes. And nobody ever got hit. Even with all the shelling that the Japanese did on Guadalcanal for hours at a time. And they dropped bombs, 500-pound bombs on the island. No one ever got hit. But it was mostly all buildings. Because, you know, they couldn't move anywhere. That was it. But, do you want to hear something more?
Sure.
Well, the biggest one, we'll start with Guadalcanal. And we started at, they started to shell at 5 o'clock in the morning. And they shelled until 8 o'clock in the morning. 3 hours, steady. Can you imagine how many money they spent doing nothing? So anyway, we landed on the shore, and I was in the artillery, 75 millimeters. And our captain was so eager to engage the enemy that we went ahead of the infantry. So about half a mile in, the captain found out that, hey, we were all by ourselves. So he stopped, and we came back to the shore. And then, of course, from then on, we started to go towards the airport. Henderson Airport there, because the first thing that everybody wants is the airport. Because you can land planes there, and from then on you can control everything what you want. Okay? So we got over to the airport, about 11, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And by that time, the Japs got information that we landed on Guadalcanal. Well, before we knew it, the Japanese had a airport at Rabaul, 500 miles away. And they sent their airplanes over to Henderson Field. It took 2.5 hours to go from 500 miles to our place, drop their bombs, and then go back to Rabaul again, a distance of 1,000 miles. So you can just imagine how much gasoline that they used. So they just barely made it back home. See? And if they tried to do some kind of a strafing around our place there, they would have a very difficult time in reaching Rabaul. Okay? So from that on, August the 7th, 8th, and 9th, we were continually bombed by the Japanese from Rabaul. And they were coming over with about 24 Japanese bombers. And I can remember there were 5 of us after we finished stringing our telephone wires to the 1st, 5th, and 7th Marines. We stood up there and we watched these 24, 25 silver bombers coming towards the airport. And we looked up there and our mouths went down. They were so beautiful looking. All of a sudden, we heard boom, 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 boom. And there was a 500-pound bomb that landed about 100 yards away from us. Well, you know, young kids, what do they know? They don't know anything until something happens to them. So after the bombers left, we went over to look at the hole that they made, 15 feet deep and 15 feet wide. Boy, we started to think a little bit about that. See? Okay, that's the first one.
How did you stay in touch with your family? How did you stay in touch with your family?
None.
You didn't?
We didn't have enough time to write, didn't do anything, period.
What was the food like?
Food? Well, let me tell you something. The transports used to come over here, over to the shore, and a lot of the Marines would go over there unload the ships. And we had food, we had gasoline, we had candy, we had everything else. Then we had cans of pineapple, peaches, and things of that sort. Well, see, I'm a scavenger. And when I go any place, I like to grab things. So I was always bringing back food to the tent. So after a couple of months, we had a doctor coming over to inspect all the Marines. He came over to me, took off my shirt, felt my skin around my hand. He says, boy, this guy's, he's well fed. And I smiled because, boy, I'm telling you, I was well fed.
What kind of supplies did you have or need?
Well, we needed actually food in order to subside, but we needed ammunition for our 75 millimeters, 105s for our millimeters, our anti-craft guns, and we need for our rifles, machine guns, the usual stuff.
What kind of awards did you receive or citations? Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Oh, yes. Well, we got ribbons. One ribbon for Guadalcanal, one for New Guinea, one for New Britain, one for Peleliu. Then I got a Purple Heart for getting hit on my last campaign. Fortunately, I was there for about a month before I got hit. And let's see, do I have to stay on Guadalcanal again, or can I go back to my other islands? Because there were 4 islands.
Yeah, go ahead and go back to.
The other islands.
To which one?
The other islands.
Oh, well, the one, New Guinea, was mostly all jungles, high mountains, and there were no Japanese soldiers there. All we had to do was worry about Japanese bombers coming over and dropping bombs on us. So we got a citation for that. Then we went to New Britain, and that was the worst island there was. It was all jungle. And when you talk about trees around here, forget it. Because you couldn't even walk through the thing. You'd have to get a machete and to cut your way through. So for 5 days, we had a steady 5 days of rain. And the tanks couldn't go through, other vehicles couldn't go through. In fact, there was one tank that got stuck, and a Japanese soldier came over, lifted up the lid, dropped a hand grenade down in there and killed everyone in a in the tank. Okay? But outside of that, they had, our main objective was to grab the airport. That was the main thing. Okay? Because with the airport, you have control over hundreds of miles of area around you. Okay? So anyway, I'm glad that I did not get into the infantry. They were really devastated. They were killed left and right. Thousands of them were killed by the Japanese. Fortunately, I was in the artillery, 75. So we were behind the infantry as much as 2-3 miles. And the only time when they needed us is when they couldn't push the Japanese back. And the Japanese were giving them a rough time. So we had to back them up with our firing. Okay? But, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That was New Britain.
Yeah, New Britain.
Okay.
Yeah, from there, yeah, and then they had high mountains up there, and the Japanese were on top of the one high mountain, and our officer wanted to take to get rid of the Japanese on top of the hill. Because of what they were doing, they had grenades, they had all kinds of weapons up there, and they were giving our infantry a rough time. So we had to go up there. I didn't have to go up there. Well, I'm telling you, I was really lucky. I got out. I didn't get into the infantry. I got out of the infantry into the artillery. Okay, and but looking back at it, we were there for months, and a lot of them were killed. And sometimes I had nightmares. Even after 60 years, you go back and you look at it, you know. But the people in Congress, they don't care. Hey, they got the fringe benefits. They sleep at night. They don't have to worry about any kind of enemy creeping up on them. So we were there for about 3 months with the enemy killing quite a few of the Marines. I came out okay. From New Britain, then we went to Palau Island for a rest camp. And that was a small coconut tree island with very little water. We stayed there for, I don't know, a couple of months. Then we decided to hit Peleliu. And from what I gather, even before we went there, we got word that we didn't have to take Peleliu. But General MacArthur was going to hit the Philippines. And he didn't want anybody coming from Peleliu with their airplanes dropping bombs on his troops there. But we had command of all hundreds of miles with our Navy ships because we really destroyed their Navy. And the biggest problem with the Japanese were they could have won that war. The only trouble with that is the Army, the Navy, the Marines, not the Marines, but the ships did not cooperate with each other. They did not give the information like they should have. If they did, we would never won that war. Because they were arguing, even their generals and their planners were arguing among themselves what they should do until it was too late. Overconfidence destroys a lot of people. That was, and the fact, going back to Guadalcanal, we had Japanese destroyers, battleships, airplanes, and everything else, and they knocked out quite a few of our ships. Some of our ships went away from them instead of attacking them. You know, like in the football game, in order to win a game, you got to advance. You can't stop and give up, see? And what did the Japanese, our ships went away, and the Japanese, instead of pursuing them, stopped. Went back to Rabaul. That gave our ships time to regroup. Fortunately for us, because from then on, we were without any kind of protection from the Navy for about 2-3 weeks. That's a time when the Japanese used to come over with their battleships and shell us at night. There. Oh, and then what saved my neck was this. They were, one time the planes came over, 12 o'clock. We used to have our dinner, mess hall, at 11:30, and we all lined up, and the planes would come over condition red. And of course, I'm always they used to call me chow hound. And as soon as we heard that channel condition red, all the Marines left for the air raid shelter. Not me. I stayed there and I ate until I heard the bombs coming down. Because when they came down, you could hear a whistle. All of a sudden, I got, hey, no use of me staying out here eating. I might as well run for the air raid shelter. I got in there, and the air raid shelter made by the Japanese were made of wood. And when they got in there, the whole place was quivering. And I thought it was going to collapse. I sat down, all the Marines were groaning, hollering, and things of that sort. And I sat down, scared. I happened to look up. I saw this Marine smiling. And something told me that, hey, if he could smile with all that bombs bombing around us, I might as well smile too. And I did. And that saved my neck quite a few times. I should have been killed about 6 times. Somebody else took my place instead of me. Okay? There wasn't.
Okay. 5 minutes left. I did before, we've got 5 minutes left, and if you would, I'd like to go back. You mentioned getting the Purple Heart for being wounded. Would you mind telling us the circumstances of that?
Okay, I can do that right now. Well, this was on Peleliu. And the infantry, the 1st, 5th, and 7th, were having a hard time. They were getting decimated by the Japanese in their caves. So at one time, about October, forgot what day it was now, about 11th, the word came down to the artillery that they needed about 15 people to act as reserves for the 5th Marines, because they were going to make an attack against the Japanese the next day. That was 11th, 12th. Yeah, 11th. Got up there 12th. They were telling us what we had to do, and this great big mountain up there had the Japanese with all their artillery up there. And we were going to, the 5th Marines were going to attack them. So we got prepared for them, for the 5th Marines. Next day, October the 13th, they start to attack the Japanese up at the ridge, and then the Japanese start to shell us. So I was in my foxhole. Something told me to get out of my foxhole. Because as soon as I got out of it and I stood up, a shrapnel came down and it would have sliced me right in half. But it happened that I moved to one place and the shrapnel came down and hit my knee, pants, went all the way down, south like this, and then it turned flat. It came down and hit my metatarsus, right across here, and broke the 5 bones. This was at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so I called, there was a corpsman, Navy corpsman. I called him up about 5 or 10 yards away. He came over and he took me over to the field hospital. And by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they put me on the hospital ship. And then from then on, I went to San Francisco. Then from San Francisco to Philadelphia Navy Yard Hospital. And then short time later, August the 9th, I got my discharge papers. That was that. But I'll tell you one thing though. Every time I look back, somebody was always looking after me. Because whenever I sat down or laid down, there was always somebody right next to me. They got it instead of me. And there was one time on Guadalcanal when the Japanese came over at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. There was guards. There were 4 of us and another 4 that relieved us. So these 4 came over, and when they heard the Japanese, the bombers coming over, they sat down, they laid down in their foxholes, and they told us who were standing up, 4 of us who were standing up, to get down into the foxhole. But when you're young, who's going to listen to you? Nobody. You know? So what happened was, I laid down, and then something told me to get out of there. Something told my brain to stand up and get around to a group of trees. As soon as I laid down, a 500-pound bomb came down where I was lying down. The other 3 Marines that were standing up watching, they were blown apart. That's right. That's what happens when you don't listen to somebody that knows better than you do. See? And I still don't listen. But anyway, that was thing there. I said, something told me to get out of there. And that, I bet, should have been dead about 4 or 5, about 6 or 7 times. But something always told me, took me out of my seat and moved me to someplace else. But that was it. Anything else?
Anything else you want to add that we didn't cover?
Oh, Guadalcanal was the length had north, south, west, and east. So from west to east, it was 90 miles long. It was on that picture I gave you. And then how wide it was about 26 miles wide. And in between, they had the airport. And then we had at least 25,000 Japanese on that island. All 25,000 died. 12,000 were killed, and 12,000 got malaria, dysentery, sick, they starved, they did everything. And we came down with malaria, about 1,500, 1,600 of us. But we were fortunate.
Did you ever get malaria? Did you ever get malaria?
Yes. And, well, we went to Australia, over to Brisbane, where they put us was in the jungles. So everybody started to get malaria again. So we went from Brisbane all the way down to Melbourne. We got there September. No, we got there in January. And we reorganized everything, did all kinds of work and so on. We were ready to leave in September. I was hot. I went over to the hospital. They took my thermostat, and I had 104 degrees. And they said, there's nothing wrong with me. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with me. I have 104 degrees fever. And they came to the conclusion that I had malaria. So they gave me Atabrun pills, and they gave me all that sort of stuff. So within 3 days, I was okay, and we moved to New Guinea.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you for coming and letting me interview you, and thank you for serving our country.
Hey, all I know is we serve our country, but we have people up in Congress that are not alert. Everybody tells them what's going on. When you have a junior and a senior high school kid